Hello, my name is Bubs, I'm an artist, and I like to hear myself talk, and today I'd like to hear myself talk about Pokémon. Again. So, for those of you that have been hanging out for a while, you'll probably already know that this is my second time trying my hand at redesigning Pokémon. But this time will be my first that I'm actually doing the redesigning for the sake of a video. My last video was a showcase of designs I made for fun, so they admittedly weren't as polished as they could have been, even if I preferred the redesigns to the original. I knew I wanted to do another one where I actually tried a little harder to make the designs feel like actual Pokemon designs and not Bubs originals, so I almost immediately started to fiddle with even more redesigns once that video went up. As it turns out, there are a lot of designs among the over 1,000 monsters out there that I do not like. And as fate would have it, Pokemon and Nintendo is kind of a trending topic right now. Sure, it's not all necessarily for good reasons, but I figured I'd move this video up in my schedule to strike while the iron is hot. You gotta optimize for engagement sometimes after all. I'll show all my Pocket Monster redesigns in just a moment, but before we do that, here comes my obligatory disclaimer. If I have different preferences in terms of what I like to see in a Pokemon design than you, that is not a personal attack. It is okay to like a design I don't like and dislike a design that I do. Having different opinions is okay. On that same token, you are also more than welcome to not like what I come up with. Even if I am trying hard to create a better Pokemon design rather than just a design I like more here, my redesigns will still cater to my sensibilities and preferences, which can be different than yours, and while I subjectively prefer my designs to the official ones, that does not mean they are objectively better. Art is inherently subjective. I do not purport to be better at designing Pokemon than the folks whose literal job it is to do so, and I do not fear constructive criticism. It helps me grow as an artist. Speaking of, surprise! I redesigned my redesigns from the first video based off of some really good critique I got, but I'm actually gonna go ahead and save that till the end of the video, so if you want to see that, you gotta make sure to watch all the way through. Haha, engagement bait. For now, I'll finally jump onto the first redesign. The first mon on the chopping block is none other than... Starting off with this redesign makes me feel a little bit like a fraud. The title of this video is definitely going to follow the format of the first video of this nature, but I actually don't dislike Mr. Mime all that much. In fact, I actually quite like it. I know that puts me in the minority of Mr. Mime observers, of course, but I have to be true to myself. Mr. Mime is goofy, and it has a charm that I appreciate, so calling it one of my least favorite Pokemon is admittedly kind of dishonest. It is, however, one of my least favorite designs, and that is because of one simple fact that I've absolutely never ever gotten over, and that is that Mr. Mime does not look like a mime. I severely doubt that this is a unique piece of criticism for this design, and it's also a really simple critique, but I find it to be valid nonetheless. A very basic principle of design is that you should be communicating something, anything, to the viewer about whatever thing you've designed, whether that's a creature or a character or something else. Design is storytelling, and while in context it is obvious what Mr. Mime is supposed to be, if you strip it of its Pokédex entries, its animations, and its name, I don't think people would ever guess its gimmick just by looking at it. I don't even think its typical poses would be enough to save it. It is so very obviously more inspired by stereotypical clowns or jesters, and while there is a decent amount of overlap there, don't come for me, clown or mime elitists, I feel like this is just a really confusing miscommunication, and I have never once understood why this is what was went for. It isn't as if the stereotypical mime concept didn't exist back when Mr. Mime was first getting cooked up, so why ignore the traits that everyone associates with a mime? So, very simply put, I set out to redesign Mr. Mime with a singular intention. Make the darn thing look like a mime. I technically had the secondary intention of making the face less off-putting to the general public and also just making the mon less uncanny to people in general, but that's more subjective, so I'm focusing on the mime part for now. For this redesign, you can see right away from my reference image that I obviously opted for a very stereotypical mime vibe. I gave stripes on its arms and legs, kind of mimey makeup, and a big beret. I don't want to completely get rid of the original body shape of Mr. Mime because I honestly think it gives him a pretty interesting shape that doesn't read as too terribly humanoid. The pink orbs are a big contributor there, and I also appreciate that it allows for these big pops of pink. Pink is obviously associated with psychic types, so I kept this detail. Other things I did to help pull Mr. Mime further away from the uncanny valley was to really exaggerate the size of the beret and the shoes. I think that exaggerating and simplifying these sorts of things help them to A, not look like actual clothing on the Mon, and B, make their proportions very differentiated from the humans you see in the Pokemon world. That's at the end of the day the metric you'd have to abide by, as style affects what will be perceived as humanoid in context. I also decided to give Mr. Mime here gigantic clown shoes since I knew I wanted to give it the giant beret to replace the weird hair, and I felt that giving it the giant shoes would help the entire design look a little less top-heavy. In my opinion, the OG Mr. Mime design feels kind of unsteady since the feet are so small compared to all the visual weight of the Bulba's body and weird hair situation. I prefer a more balanced look personally. I wanted to keep the color palette pretty much the same, though I did end up making everything but the pink a little desaturated towards the end, since mimes are usually associated with black and white or otherwise lowly saturated colors. Normally, I would not want to desaturate a Pokemon design, as my personal preference for most designs would actually involve cranking the saturation to ungodly levels. Still, I think it once again contributes more to the mime vibes without completely abandoning the original design concepts. Finally, I decided to simplify the mouth after several failed attempts to give it lips, and also reduced the size of the little cheek blushes. I really didn't like how that area of pink was overlapped with the pink on the shoulders, because it made the face seem a bit muddy to me. Plus, I feel like when I see artistic renditions of mimes, they typically do have very small applications of blush, so I was once again leaning into that typical depiction there. And there you have it, my proposed redesign to Mr. Mime. I honestly didn't change too terribly much, which is going to be a bit of a trend for some of the designs in this video. I'm gonna finish off this section with a Mr. Mime fun fact because I think giving a fun fact for each mon is a cute idea. Anyways, did you know that Mr. Mime is actually not always a Mr.? Because Mr. Mime was introduced in Generation 1, no Pokemon had a gender besides Nidoran and Nidorina when translators chose Mr. Mime as the English name, nor was this the case for other localizations that followed suit, such as the French and Spanish names. However, later on, when breeding was introduced, Mr. Mime was given a 50-50 gender ratio. This discrepancy, if you choose to view it as such, is likely due to the fact that Mr. Mime's name in Japanese, which I will just put on the screen so as to avoid butchering as much Japanese today as possible, does not contain any gender information like it does in English. So, yes, your Mr. Mime has just as much of a chance of being a lady mime as a dude mime. Make of that what you will. Alrighty, on to the next design. The first legendary I am willing to tackle, the love-hate Pokemon, known as... A little background on me, Pokemon White was the first Pokemon game I ever played. It was my introduction to the series, and so I have a very special place in my heart for all the Pokemon introduced in Gen 5, and that especially goes for the legendaries in that game. The Swords of Justice Mons were definitely really cool to me. Cobalion was even blue, and a Pokemon being blue is pretty much a surefire way to get closer to my favorites list, but the Force of Nature Mons felt extra special just because of how they appeared in the game. They brought crazy weather with them, so there was a real impact on the game and the environment, and they were so much harder to encounter. They always felt a little more legendary than the other legendaries to me. So, of course, when I played Legends Arceus much later on in my life, I was super excited at the prospect of a new Force of Nature Mon getting introduced. This made it all the more painful when I actually got to see Enamorous. As much as I'd like to kick this section off with a positive discussion, I also would rather not beat around the bush here. I know that there is a chance that you, viewer, might really like Enamorous, and while I respect your right to have an opinion, I, for the life of me, would never in a million years be able to fathom why you like this design. There are so many things about it that I really dislike from an aesthetic perspective. The massive egg head that looks really bulbous and strange, the awkward sausage body, the tiny twiggy arms, the weird nipple on the top of its head, the overly busy pattern of the snaky tail, and of course, the pièce de résistance, the neck. If you've ever looked at Enamorous and thought that the proportions of it looked really off for a humanoid design, but couldn't quite put your finger on why, it's probably because this would be the neck situation going on beneath the snake. Yeah, that's certainly... it's something. I also just think that the application of colors and patterns for this mon is very haphazard, I want to say. There is already a lot going on with the body of Enamorous as she shares her brother's strange markings, which isn't that big of a deal, but then the snake tail just comes in with that obnoxious heart pattern that distracts away from the main body. I think a major reason that the busy pattern doesn't work for me here, but the similarly or even more so complex tails of the other forces of nature mons is because each of their tails are being thrown over their shoulders rather than actually physically touching. There is a gap there, which creates a little space between all this visual noise, but Enamorous, alas, does not share this, making for a pretty displeasing experience for me. That all being said, I stand by my little mini rant from the first video. An ugly design is not inherently a bad design. It is a frankly exhausting experience to see how frequently designs like Garbodor or Phoebus will receive hate solely based on them being ugly, when that is quite literally the entire point of the design. There's a difference between not liking an ugly Pokemon and finding the ugly Pokemon to actually be a bad design, as in, it does a bad job of actually getting across what it is supposed to. While many of my reasons for disliking Enamorous have to do with it being ugly, luckily for this video, but unfortunately for Enamorous, my issues with it run much deeper. Firstly, I think that this design does a really terrible job at communicating the idea behind this mon. According to the Pokédex, which is admittedly slim pickings since it's literally one entry as of my writing the script, Enamorous is basically this spirit of spring whose presence heralds an end to the bitter cold of winter. This idea, coupled with the presence of the snake-like tail coiled around it, has led people to believe that Enamorous is based off of Ugajin, a fertility and harvest spirit from Japanese folklore that is commonly depicted as a human head with a coiled-up snake body. It is also suspected that, similar to Tornadus, Thundurus, and Landorus, she may also be inspired by the Islamic jinn and the Greek anemoi. The jinn thing definitely holds up since jinn are kind of well known as shapeshifters in Islamic mythology from what I can see, and the anemoi thing works since they're all wind spirits to some extent. These inspirations aren't necessarily unclear, but the problem for me is that Enamorous doesn't actually read as clearly to me as a spring-specific mon, and this contributes to it being a pretty terrible addition to the Force of Nature lineup if you ask me. You can actually really get a sense for the individual roles that they play when you look at their cloud hair and their tails. Tornadus has a lot more curling, swoopy shapes on these major areas of differentiation, highlighting his connection to wind. Thundurus's design has the giant, spiky lightning bolt hair and the spiky bead tail, which I think helps you see immediately that this is more to do with storms than its brothers, and is also particularly aggressive compared to the other two due to the sharper shapes, something backed up by the Pokédex. Finally, Landorus has a lot more boxy, sturdy, rocky sorts of shapes in the hair and tail, helping connect this beast to the earth. These might not be massive details, but they do a lot of heavy lifting. When I look at Enamorous, I do not get any hint of anything that has to do with spring. The main focus of the design seems to be this love-hate kind of concept for which this mon is titled, which, aside from the Pokédex explaining that Enamorous's love gives rise to spring, but it will absolutely destroy you if you are disrespectful to nature, doesn't really fit in with the idea of the forces of nature mons for me. I mean, her design doesn't either. The wispy heart hair does not read to me as masses of clouds like with the other three, and actually just looks like hair. Plus, the fact that she is so tiny and spindly compared to the others in the lineup just makes her look so out of place. But seriously, her three brothers are all to do with some sort of weather-related or natural order type of concept. I'm assuming that they went into this love-hate idea with Enamorous because Landorus is already the abundance Pokemon and has to do with growth and thriving crops and all that. Many critics might cite this as a reason to never make Enamorous as there was no need for her, but I kind of disagree. I am simply more of the opinion that they should have focused on a different aspect for her. I will go more in detail about how I address that later, but we are at the point now where I must admit that this design was kind of my own personal hell. One or two people noticed that for just a moment, Enamorous showed up in one of the canvases of my last video. This, friends, is because I wanted to try my hand at upgrading Enamorous ages ago, and every time I have tried, I am unsatisfied. So let me take you on this journey. When I first started, I was mainly targeting aesthetic issues because I was doing it for funsies back then, and that was kind of all I was worried about at the time. If I was going to coil the snake tail around the neck, it would be once and only once so as to avoid the weird neck issue. I wanted the body to be bulkier and in fact have big wide hips. I find that fuller figures lend themselves better to my brain's idea of a fertility goddess, so out with the weird sausage body. I wanted the face to look less like it does, because that's just, it's just gross. And I wanted to try and make the color of the snake play nicer with the rest of the colors and patterns and all that. Overall, my very first pass wasn't that bad, but when I was putting together my last video, it wasn't polished at all, and I felt like something was missing, so I did not include it. I pushed that idea off to the side as a reference point and tried again for this video. This time, I put a greater effort into tackling the thematic issues. I wanted her to actually have a better visual association with spring and plants and all that, while also making the ideas from the first pass a little more simple. I have a tendency to overdo things when I make designs, and while it works out just fine for me and my art style, the world of Pokemon does not utilize my style, and designing Pokemon is also just generally not something I am well versed in to begin with, so I figured dialing it back was probably for the best. However, I think that for this second pass, I dialed it back too much. This was a legendary after all, and no matter what I did, I felt like it was always lacking something. Something to make it legendary. On top of that, I could not for the life of me figure out how to actually get across the idea that I wanted. I tried putting flowers in her hair multiple times in multiple ways, which I thought was definitely cute at some moments, but I felt like it didn't really work for a Pokemon design, let alone a design that was supposed to fit in the lineup of the forces of nature. I also felt like it was a little off since Enamorous isn't a grass type. I don't know. I ended up settling on giving the snake tail some vaguely flower-shaped markings after a long road of trying a million different things to make this tail look good to me. And it still didn't really look good to me, but I was tired and I was giving up. That's when I thought this part would end, with me giving up and coming to you hat in hand saying, I'm so sorry, it's not that good, but it's all I have. But then I woke up the day I was set to record my voiceover and looked at it again, and I was enraged. I felt a fire. Sure, I liked it better than the starting point of OG Enamorous, but I was actually trying to do better than that this time around. My goal was to make a better design, not just a design I liked more, and looking at it, I just felt like my Enamorous was kind of boring in comparison to the original. Plus, the silhouette of this design, despite the neat posing, was a little hard to understand, and I didn't want to just give up, so I decided to start basically from scratch. My new objective including a sort of reimagining of the concept of Enamorous as a Pokemon. As I said earlier, I personally think it would have been smarter to lean into Enamorous as a sort of force of different seasons rather than strictly just a spring goddess sort of thing. I wanted to push this idea of cyclicity and death and rebirth, which I also think could feed into the original love-hate idea for her concept. And when thinking on that and doing a couple of sketches that went nowhere, I got my best idea that finally made me feel like I was creating a concept worth showing off in this video. The Ouroboros. The Ouroboros, for those unaware, is a self-eating serpent that is in a state of constantly swallowing its own tail, but also growing just as much as it eats, meant to represent ideas of eternity and, luckily for me, cyclic renewal. It's even sometimes considered a symbol of fertility. I thought that this would actually work perfectly for Enamorous, considering that she's already got this snake tail, and it would better mimic the movements of the tails of her brothers. So I made Enamorous's tail kind of swoop around her in a circle that sort of closed in on its point of origin. Obviously, the illusion of this circle would not be the same from other angles, but from the front, that Ouroboros thing comes across fairly clearly, if I do say so myself. I also decided to put spikes along the spine of the snake tail, both to make it so that the snake tail looked less boring, and to kind of give off the impression of a thorny vine. I thought this was a nice compromise to putting actual plants anywhere near Enamorous, but still giving that impression. Plus, it does definitely make her look a little more dangerous, which is great for the wrathful lady she is. My biggest change for this one, other than the tail, which I don't know why I put off for so long, is that I just made her cross her arms. There's pretty much no reason that she didn't share the same pose as all 3 other legendaries in her group, aside from the fact that maybe it's more stereotypically sassy lady-coded to have your hands on your hips than to cross your arms. And like, I guess that's fine, but I think this just makes her match better. As tempting as it was to just make Enamorous buff like her brothers to make her fit better in the lineup as well, I honestly kind of liked that she wasn't super buff. I simply did not love that she was executed in the way that she was. Apologies to disappoint. Anyways, after far too many attempts, here is my proposed redesign for Enamorous. I definitely did rush myself a bit on the line art here for the final drawing, but hey, cut me some slack. I did this very last minute. Besides, the proof of concept is where it counts, right? I don't know. I am satisfied with how this makes her just fit better with everybody else. It makes her concept a little more purposeful within the group, and it makes her identity a little more distinct. Also, she's less ugly. Subjective, but yeah, she's less ugly to me. I am very intrigued to hear about which version of Enamorous was actually my best, and if I threw away a better concept according to you lovely commenters, so definitely let me know. Time for an Enamorous fun fact. Did you know that Enamorous is the only new Pokemon introduced in Legends Arceus that does not evolve from a previously introduced Pokemon? All other new Pokemon in the game, which includes Wurdeer, Ursaluna, Kleavor, Basculegion, and Sneasler, all evolved from Pokemon that have already appeared in other games. Enamorous may not have much going for her, but at least she's got that. We are moving right along to a much more laid-back redesign. We are grabbing a member of the Pikachu family to give a tiny makeover, and that member is... This section is going to be a speedy one, which is nice considering the trial that the last section was, to write and to speak. So, Togedemaru. I know that this one has fans simply because it's cute. I'm not about to argue against this idea. It's squishable and orbular and definitely a fine enough addition to the electric rodent, or as I like to simply say, Pikachu family. I prefer to say Pikachu family rather than electric rodent because several of the electric rodents could very well be representing animals who are most definitely not rodents, and this actually goes for Togedemaru, but we'll get there when we get there. Anyways, as much as I really want to, I do not like Togedemaru. In my humble opinion, this is one of the more forgettable members of the Pikachu fam lineup. The color scheme is pretty plain, with very little contrast or bright colors, the shape is very simple, and the face is about as bog standard as you can get for this lineup. It just doesn't feel like it's actually adding anything new to this little group. Not that this issue is unique for the Pikachu family. I mean, Dedenne is right there, and Palmo's existence is completely pointless, but it's definitely one of the more generic-feeling Pikachu clones of the bunch. However, the real reason I don't like Togedemaru is that Togedemaru is supposed to be a hedgehog. I can acknowledge that it is possible Togedemaru is based off of the Ryukyu spiny rat, which is an endangered species of long-haired rodent native to Japan. The Japanese word for this animal, here we go, is apparently Togenizumi. So some speculate there is a link, though also apparently toge is just the Japanese word for spine, so the toge part of the name might just be because Togedemaru has spines. Also, I believe in the hedgy theory more simply because the entire thing with Togedemaru is that it can curl up into a spiky ball when threatened, and that's kind of the only thing that I know hedgehogs to do, both in real life and in my Japanese media. If Togedemaru is a hedgehog, just like with Mr. Mime, this is not something I would expect people to guess right away just by looking at it in an unagitated state. It's not impossible to guess, and I'm certainly not trying to say there is no resemblance, but the fact that it's not super duper clear despite how simple of a design Togedemaru has is not good. In order to be scientific, I actually did ask 3 lovely people in my life that know little to nothing about Pokémon what they assumed Togedemaru was meant to be, and of those folks, only 1 guessed hedgehog. Though I will also point out that the person who did say hedgehog cited the face as their reasoning and nothing else. Personally, I thought it was a hamster for the longest time because of how squishy it looked. Even the one part of its body that could be spiky all the time to help with the hedgehog thing, the big lightning rod spine, is a very rounded shape that feels like a missed opportunity. I have to assume that they rounded it to prevent the silhouette from being too similar to Pikachu, but come on, if that was your concern, don't give it a lightning bolt tail. Speaking of, want to know something that really bothers me about the tail? It's that it's not a tail. Yeah, this part has far less to do with just any design philosophy, and way more to do with the fact that I just think the placement of the lightning bolt thing is super awkward from an aesthetic standpoint. It is much too high on the back for it to be a tail, or for it to be coming straight up from the center of its back. It's kind of positioned between the shoulders, if I am to assume even somewhat realistic bone structure under all that floof. Don't get me wrong, I definitely do not want more electric rodent-like creatures with lightning bolt tails. I think we can call it a wrap on that. But this particular placement where Game Freak seem to be trying to have their cake and also eat it too has always weirded me out a little. Side note, completely unrelated to anything, I have always hated that turn of phrase, even though I say it all the time. The implication is that it is unreasonable and unrealistic for a person to expect that they can eat cake once they have it, but it's literally not. It's actually unreasonable and unrealistic to expect a person to acquire cake just to have it. What else would you do with the cake? The final issue that I have with this little guy is that it doesn't really read as a steel type to me. Like, aside from it being gray, there's not really anything going on with it that would have me personally guessing steel type. Looks about as much like a steel type as Minccino. Even with 3D renders, it doesn't seem very metallic, and considering that it being a steel type does make it a little more unique among its electric rodent compatriots, it seems a bit of a missed opportunity. So my main goal was just to tweak the guy a little bit to make it seem more like a hedgehog, a bit more like a steel type, and also look a little more different from the rest of the Pikachu fam. On the first pass, I wasn't going to let myself change the concepts behind them on too much, specifically in the animation department, so my idea was to simply change how the hedgie sat in its neutral pose. I rolled it back a little so it would look like the many lovely pictures online of a chonky hedgehog chilling on its back, because not only was this super cute looking, but I also think that it made it a little more distinctly hedgy-like rather than vague chonky mouse or hamster. I also did appreciate the sort of beanbag chair silhouette this gave the little dude. I thought the shape was more interesting than the orb. I also decided to put the lightning bolt spike thing on top of the head because not only did this placement feel less awkward, but it felt more logical. It is literally supposed to act as a lightning rod, so having it on the highest point of the body makes more sense than its previous point. I'd give the other placement more credit if I saw Togedemaru running around on all fours more. After I came up with this first pass and let it sit untouched for a bit, I slowly stopped liking it. While still very cute, it's not like that's something that it has on the original this time, and despite the change in pose, it still really read as hamster to me, and not hedgehog. Plus, I feel like I didn't really do a good enough job to remedy the whole steel type thing. Basically, the only real improvement I made was putting the lightning rod spine on the top of its head. So I decided to go in for a second pass after learning what I had and try to push this concept more. I allowed myself to fiddle with the way that Togedemaru moves around and is animated this time, as long as it was in favor of a better end result for me. I I decided that I wanted to push the shape of the face more to feel a little more distinct, both in terms of looking like a hedgehog and in terms of looking different from the other Pikachus. I gave it a pointier face with some spikes on it, modified the shape of the ears a bit, and also made the head separated from the body, specifically so that I could give it a sort of hunched look. I also decided that I wanted it to always have the little spikes sticking up, since it would give it a sharper look overall and help better allude to the hedgehog vibes. Obviously, these spikes standing up is more of an attack mode sort of thing for OG Togedemaru, and while that is kind of neat in terms of animation and stuff, I feel like from a design standpoint, having a spikier silhouette is just valuable for what they are going for, so I decided to forfeit the dynamic animation opportunity. The biggest change that I made was that I wanted it to sort of always be curled up, which I was trying to avoid initially since it was only supposed to do that when startled, and considering I had already made the decision to have the spikes always stick out, I kind of didn't want to do this too, but I ended up thinking of a great way to get around this. I initially had it so that it was only partially curled up and imagined that it could fully curl still when startled, but when I realized that it still didn't look much like a steel type, I had an idea that I think is pretty neat. I decided that the gray part of my Togedemaru is actually kind of a stiff metallic shell, and when startled, it can pull its head and feet inside of the shell for protection while also extending the spikes out further. I thought this gimmick still does a fine job of achieving the hedgy coil strategy while also making the steel type thing more visibly plausible. I also just thought that the quick doodle I did of Togedemaru tucked inside the shell was really cute. So yeah, this is how I would design Togedemaru if it was up to me. I think I did a pretty good job making it fit its standard Pikachu fam lineup while still giving it more of its own identity. I also kind of liked that the final pass for my design actually ended up having a very similar silhouette to OG Togedemaru, only maybe a bit more distinct since I pulled the lightning bolt shape further away from the main mass of the body. I think it really shows my initial thesis that Togedemaru wasn't too terribly far away from delivering me what I wanted out of it, and I hope that this design delivered what you want, if you feel the same about the OG design as I do. Here's your Togedemaru fun fact. Togedemaru is one of those mons whose name is pretty much the same in all localizations. The only variations are just transcriptions of the original name to make the sounds flow better for other languages, that being the Mandarin and Cantonese Chinese localizations. Togedemaru was just the best name for the goober, what can I say? Anyways, that's a wrap on our cutesy wootsy electric friend. Onto a design that many people consider an abomination. I don't know that it's the ugliest fish, but I do know that it's... Bruxish is a design that I don't think I have ever seen a single defender for. I am sure they must exist. Statistically speaking, there exists at least one defender for every Pokemon out there. Still, I have pretty much only seen hatred for this color vomit teeth gnasher, and this is not surprising. Bruxish is, first of all, a fish, and fish Pokemon tend to be a lesser liked roster across the board due to how samey they can be, which I both understand as a person who cares a lot about design and lament as a person who is a diehard Watermon stan. On top of that, this mon's color scheme is just a lot. I think we're going for psychedelic tropical fish, which would be cool if the color placement felt a little more purposeful. This could be a subjective thing, obviously, but I have seen a lot of others hate on the colors and patterns too, so I'm not entirely off the mark, I think. Also, of course, the mouth with the lips and everything do not seem to appeal to really anyone, and that eye placement is just very, very awkward. It's just a little too high up and far backwards to feel natural to me. I also personally hate its quote, protuberance, and think that it looks like it has a weird plug on its head. I do think that it's neat that it opens up into a flower when it attacks. That's kind of neat. But I will also say, from the theme of the Pokemon standpoint, I'm not 100% sure what a flower has to do with it other than it's kind of girly, I think. I did see some concept art on a reference sheet that seemed to imply it would hide underwater with the protuberance sticking up kind of as a lure, and this is also referenced in the Pokedex a few times, but it's not open in these moments, so again, I'm not sure why the protuberance opens up into a flower. I think that, honestly, the greatest sin of Bruxish, really, is just that its stats aren't good enough for people to put up with its appearance. That's probably why I don't see any defenders, if I'm honest. Once again, though, remember, ugly Pokemon does not equal bad design, and I think that is especially true with Bruxish. See, Bruxish is most likely based off of the reef triggerfish, or, as it is known by its Hawaiian name, the Humu Humu Nuku Nuku Pua. Yeah. Look, if that pronunciation sucked, I'm sorry. I tried my best, and that's all you can ask of me. I tried multiple times. That's the best it's gonna get. I'm sorry. Anyways, this is what that sucker looks like. Not only does Bruxish really nail the look of this awkward-ass fish, but it's also the official state fish of Hawaii, so it seems only logical to assume that Bruxish, a native to Alola, which is based off of Hawaii, is supposed to be this fish. Even the stupid protuberance appears to be in the same location as that silly little fin on the top of the triggerfish's head, so this is one of those designs that is actually great in terms of getting across the inspiration. However, that doesn't mean I like the design. See, while the shape is very accurate to the fish, I find the pattern on the fish to be really confusing. It vaguely follows some shapes that I saw on pictures of real triggerfish, but to me, I think the bubbles and things look a little bit more like a lava lamp or something. Which, yeah, I think works for a psychic type, but I personally find that it makes the pattern a little less readable due to where my eyes get drawn. In fact, I think the biggest issue with this design is where I feel like my eyes get drawn when I look at it. I don't know if it's just me, but I feel like all the lines are kind of pointing me backward towards the fish's ass or off into space, drawing my attention away from one of, if not the, most important design elements, that being the mouth. And frankly, I feel like the mouth is honestly not exaggerated enough, considering that the teeth and the grinding of said teeth is a major part of the Pokemon's biology and behavior. I feel like it's a bit underplayed here, considering what Pokemon designs tend to do with major lore aspects. Again, as much as I love how accurate the shape is to this admittedly really interesting fish species, I don't know that it does a really good job as a Pokemon design. So what I wanted to do with my redesign is maintain pretty much everything I could while making the shape feel a little more mouth-centric and making the colors feel a bit more intentional. I tried to make the overall shape of the fish swoop up into the mouth and then really made the mouth and lips bigger to try and bring the eyes towards the front more. I also decided to just lower the eye down more because while less accurate to the inspiration, I just thought it looked a little less upsetting to me, personally. I also wanted the flower protuberance to kind of be more like an angler lure, since that's kind of how it was getting used anyways, and it made it look less like a plug. Finally, I wanted to exaggerate the shape and size of the fins because I felt like I wanted them to be more fancy and maybe a bit more obviously heart-shapey, because I feel like that's kind of what they were going for. In my initial color sketch, I was not sure how I actually wanted to slap down the colors, but in my final concept drawings, I actually figured out a nice middle ground between all the bubbly shapes from the OG design and references of actual triggerfish. I specifically looked at the queen triggerfish for inspiration since it's had these really striking blue markings on it, which is why I ended up placing blue on the ends of the fins like I did. I tried to make sure that all the markings on the body at least kind of pointed back up towards the face when I could, while also just trying to make them look a little less busy to me. This is definitely the aspect of it that I'm least sure about because, admittedly, I much prefer simple color schemes and patterns when I'm designing my own stuff. I am definitely curious to see how you all felt like I did with this aspect of the design because, as I learned with the first video, just because I like it does not mean you all will. And that's Bruxish done. I am kind of surprised with how much I like this design. I don't know how to describe the feeling I'm having other than, wow, this actually looks like a real Pokemon. My style makes the designs look off, even if they are pretty solid from a conceptual standpoint, but this one actually kind of looks like the shapes and color placements could totally have come from the game. But more importantly for my purposes, I feel like all the stuff I felt was off has really been alleviated here, and I feel like the mouth area feels way more pronounced, even if I did have to move further away from the very distinct triggerfish shape to accomplish that. That is definitely a criticism I would readily accept about my proposed redesign, as OG Bruxish captures the overall shape better, and I might have been able to find a better middle ground than I did, but regardless, I'm pretty pleased here. Your Bruxish fun fact is that this fishy made its first splash in the Pokemon Adventures manga by attacking Professor Kukui's yacht, and in doing so, completely sweeps everyone on the yacht. I have no clue how y'all let that happen, considering that Bruxish is genuinely such a bad mon in terms of stats, but I do think that's really, really funny, and now I've passed on that information to any of you people who didn't know this. On to the last new redesigns. Yes, this is going to be multiple because I am tackling an entire 3-tier evolution line! Some pink goobers that I constantly get mixed up with some other pink goobers. It is none other than... So, similarly to Mr. Mime, I don't exactly dislike Chansey, nor Happiny or Blissey on their own. I think it's pretty obvious what the idea behind them is. They are eggs that also take care of eggs. Their identity is eggs. I like the egg shape. They seem big and cuddly, which is great for a bunch of kind healers. The problem with the Chansey line for me is that I always get it mixed up with the Clefairy line. I mean, they are both pink and round. They follow a similar path of evolution in terms of how their visuals change from one stage to the next, and until the advent of fairy types, both Pokemon lines were normal. When looking at the entire line, I think that Blissey and Clefable are definitely the worst offenders in terms of direct visual comparisons, which is kind of a bummer when you consider that Blissey was introduced in a later generation than Clefable. It wasn't as if all of them were introduced in the same generation and they had no time to reconsider. Now, let me tell you, I did a lot of research trying to find if this was an intentional design choice, but I really don't think it is. They don't seem to have much in common besides the visual similarities I just described and the fact that they are both considered to be more rare mons. The worst part of this research was that no one else seemed to be talking about this, which leads me to believe that I am the only person who has ever gotten them mixed up, and that initially made me super wary to include this in the video. However, there is one other critique that I have that does still justify this being here. Chansey seems like it's supposed to be an axolotl, and the other two do not. I mean, Chansey has these ear things that very much resemble axolotl gills to me, and combined with the fact that Chansey is pink and is all about healing, two things that axolotls excel in, it doesn't seem all that unlikely that Chansey was inspired by an axolotl. There's also the wide mouth and the tail too, but regardless, that axolotl inspiration doesn't really seem to be all that present in the other two, as they are both more generic pink egg. Aside from the two of them feeling a little less interesting from a design concept standpoint, I think my bigger issue with Chansey being the only one to look like an axolotl is that the Chansey line looks like Chansey shouldn't actually be there. If you took Chansey out, the jump from Happiny to Blissey actually makes more sense than having the titular middleman. It's weird to me that we go from curly ears to straight ears back to curly ears, and no tail to no tail again. Pants to naked to pants again. It's just a really strange set of choices to me, especially considering the fact that Chansey was the first one, hence why I call it the Chansey line. Chansey was introduced in Gen 1, and then the other two were introduced after the fact, so it's bizarre how Game Freak seems to have made the progenitor of the line feel like the odd one out. So my goal was simple: make the entire line feel more cohesive and axolotl-y, and try to make Blissey much more distinct from Clefable. There is no need for two big pink egg fairies. I kept a lot of the same stuff partially because it was easier for me considering I chose to switch up a complete 3-mon line like a masochist, but partially because, similar to Mr. Mime, I didn't hate everything about them from the get. Happiny stays pretty much exactly the same, aside from the fact that I gave her silly gill pigtails rather than the single curly ponytail. This is because I think it helps her mesh with the other two better. One thing that I did decide on, though, was that I wanted the Mons to look a little less egg-shaped as they mature. I thought it was kind of a logical progression that the baby version is still just a straight-up egg, but they sort of break out of that shape gradually the older it gets. Plus, while eggs are important to the entire line, I think that the literal egg that it keeps in a little pouch does plenty to get that idea across. Two things I did to make the whole line feel more cohesive was to give everyone little blushy cheeks and to keep around the little rock that Happiny hangs out with. The blushy cheeks were easy, and they helped make the color scheme of Chansey a little less boring while also just being really cute on everybody. For the rock, let me first tell you about the rock. So Happiny's little egg that it holds onto isn't actually an egg. It's a tiny rock that it basically holds onto and cares for as practice prior to evolving and getting the egg pouch. This is very cute, but I also thought it would be nice if I kept the rock around, so I just kind of put it on Chansey and Blissy's head. It's a small detail, but I do think it elevates the other two in addition to making the whole line more cohesive. I don't actually have much else to say, so I'll just end this section off. I feel like this is just enough of a change to properly address my gripes. It's not too off the rails, but it's also not such a little change that I feel uncomfortable calling it a redesign. I have to say, without a doubt, Blissey is my favorite of the bunch. If this is actually what Blissey looked like, I would genuinely be so hyped for it. It looks so calm and sweet, but also still bulky and protective, which I think is great for the vibes that OG Blissey has. And of course, there is no way I'd get this Blissey mixed up with Clefairy. No way, no sir, no ma'am, no how. Your fun fact for Chansey is this picture. Yeah, it's just this picture. I found it while I was gathering reference images and looking at Pokédex entries and such, and I really like it, so I'd like to share it with you, and now feels like a good time. Look at her little hat. Oh. Okay, that's it for all the new stuff. It is now time for the... I'm gonna breeze through showing you the original redesigns, talk about the most common critiques that I got for them that I ended up agreeing with, and then show you what I came up with in order to tackle those critiques. I honestly prefer every single one of them to my first ideas, even if they're still not perfect, though feel free to disagree. Still, I do want to say right now, even if not perfect, I probably won't do this a third time because the novelty of it has worn off. This isn't for, like, improving a design for a comic I'll be writing soon or anything like that. This is a just for funsies fan art series, essentially, so while you can give me critiques on the new ideas, just know they're gonna kind of fall on deaf ears for this particular batch. Hope that makes sense. Alright, so we started off with Hypno. As a reminder, my original goal was to make him more creature-like, look more like he'd actually evolve from Drowsy, and look closer to his Baku-based inspirations. Most people actually seem to really like what I came up with as a change to Hypno, though quite a few folks pointed out that a couple aspects made him feel a little too overcomplicated, particularly with the ring details on his body and the horns that I gave him. So for my redesign, I literally just got rid of the horns and the ring details on the arms and lower legs. Yeah, I genuinely almost got it in one, which does make sense because while I don't remember the entire process of each redesign anymore, I do for sure remember that this was the only one that I came up with over the course of multiple sittings. Still, this version actually feels more focused and easier to read. His silhouette is a little clearer, and the markings feel like they are just enough to maintain the ring shape throughout a design like I wanted, while not being too busy. Sometimes less is more, people. Yeah, this is my definitive Hypno redesign. Next up, we have Jinx and Smoochum. My goals with the redesigns originally were to make the ice typing of both Mons better represented, or rather represented at all in their designs, and make Jinx look less off-putting and uncanny. Most people thought I nailed those aspects, but a lot of people also thought my proposed changes made Jinx a bit too humanoid, more so than the standard of humanoid Pokemon designs. Which, yeah, I can be honest with myself, I just drew a hot lady. There were also a few people that seemed disappointed that I kinda completely abandoned Jinx's suspected Gyaru influence for my design, despite talking about it so much in my video. So to remedy these things, this is what I came up with instead. I tried to simplify the shapes on both designs, such as taking away Smoochum's ice crown and making both dresses simpler. I think this makes these look more like Pokemon designs than me designs, even though they're still not really in the Pokemon style. One day I'll get there. I also think this helps Jinx look a little less humanoid, especially since I found a middle ground between Jinx's original Diglett head and giving her a neck. I also decided to give Jinx mitten hands this time around, since the 5-fingered hands, despite coming from the original design, was commonly cited as a contributing factor to the overly humanoid appearance. I also thought it would be a cute way to continue leaning into the icy themes because, you know, mittens. Honestly, that and her overall rounder appearance this time definitely makes her seem a little more soft and approachable, which helps get away from looking a little too much like a dark type despite my color choices. Finally, to get more into the Gyaru inspo, I tried to give both of them bigger hair, since even though it's generally worn down, big hair is a hallmark of many Gyaru styles. I also used the new icy blue I brought to the design to give Jinx some markings that mimic similar shapes found commonly in Gyaru makeup. I can't tell if it's too much, but I think that since I really simplified the rest of the design, I can kind of get away with the face being a little busy. I honestly like these versions a lot better, and even with the changes that made her far less humanoid, I think that this Jinx is still way hotter than OG Jinx. So, score 1 me, wahoo, definitive Smoochum and Jinx. Next up was Boltund. This is what I originally presented as a redesign for Boltund, hoping to tackle how it does not look anything like Yamper, singular, and is also kind of awkward and boring looking by comparison, which made it kind of a lame evolution and lame addition to the big lineup of dog Pokemon. The most common feedback I got, aside from it being really cute and more visually interesting than OG Boltund, was that it shared a lot of similarities with Jolteon. Now, while I think that some of you were definitely exaggerating, yeah, I see it. Those silhouettes are definitely way more similar than I would personally like. I also had a few commenters point out that Boltund was likely supposed to be a greyhound, as they are commonly used in the UK as racing dogs. The Galar region is based off of the UK, and both with Boltund's typing and crazy speed stat, that's probably what they were going for, despite the fact that it looked absolutely nothing like a greyhound at all. But then again, mine didn't either, so that's still a fair critique. This is what I came up with to address those critiques. I tried to create a strange middle ground between my corgified Boltund and a new greyhound leading Boltund. I gotta be honest, I don't think this looks too much like a greyhound still, primarily since I wanted to keep the floofs to maintain the visual similarities with Yamper, but I think that the overall slimmer build and more greyhound-shaped snoot definitely gets closer than OG Boltund, so I still call it an improvement. I also simplified a lot of the markings to make them less busy, and I decided to opt for a straight-up lightning bolt tail this time since the shape was back to being really detached from Yamper. While I do think that my original idea was cute, I actually think this one is way cuter, more readable, and while this wasn't necessarily my goal, I do think this helps to address the 1 or 2 comments that pointed out how a lot of evolutions involve the Mon kind of maturing, and my original idea didn't quite meet that trend. Yeah, definitive Boltund redesign. For the next redesign, we have a Lowland Persian. My original goals were to try and make the cat look a little more regal and a little more visually interesting, as well as trying to make the big head feel a little less awkward. My thesis was that having a giant head is obviously a major part of the design, but that you could execute it in a way that looked significantly less weird than they did. Now, in terms of critique, I actually didn't really see much. People pretty much just had nice things to say, or they just didn't say anything, but this is ironically the one that, looking back, I feel is the weakest of my redesigns, so I'll let you know what my self-critique is. Firstly, while my original redesign is definitely a lot less ugly than OG Alolan Persian, I think that I got too far away from the actual prompt of blue Persian with a massive head. Part of it is the really big ears that I gave it for some reason that make the head seem a lot smaller than it is, and the other part is that I made the face on the head really big. It makes the big head seem a lot smaller than it actually is. Plus, the face looks a little too much like Meowth. I did certainly want it to look like a Meowth face, as I said in the video, but I think this goes back to the whole evolution looking more mature thing. A Persian face would look more mature, and also it is a Persian redesign, and not just a Meowth redesign. Finally, I think the shapes and patterns are just a lot more complicated than they needed to be here. OG Alolan Persian, and hell, just regular Persian, is a super simple design, so while I can definitely do more with things considering it is a regional variant, I am doing too much here. So this is what I did instead. I tried to focus on giving this kitty a fat head rather than just a big head. I think this could reasonably work with the design concepts at play that led us to Egghead McGee. It's playing on the idea of being big-headed, like as in full of itself, and the suspected inspiration from British Shorthairs, not Russian Blues. I said Russian Blue in my last video because it was in my script, but I meant British Shorthair. I literally wrote it on my canvas, so I'm not sure why I changed it in my script, but I am a human at the end of the day, and one that has a lot of trouble reading for undiagnosed reasons at that. Anywho, British Shorthairs are known for having a, quote from Google, broad face, so I thought giving it big chubby cheeks and a lot of space between the eyes hits the idea that they were going for while avoiding the OG design's tiny squished face thing that I really dislike. Other than that, I just made it bulkier in general, both because I thought it gave it a really cute shape that makes it look more like a house cat than a mountain lion or panther, which is what this regional variant is about, but also because you all taught me that Alolan Persian is likely meant to allude to Hawaii's problems with stray cats. Apparently, a bunch of dumbasses brought cats to Hawaii and then abandoned them, and because the domestic cat is an eco-terrorist, this has caused major issues for local wildlife. So I feel like the chunkiness could show off its greedy, sinister nature. Overall, I insanely prefer this to the original, and I also think this feels much more like a design we'd actually get from Game Freak than my previous one. So yeah, definitive Alolan Persian redesign. Before I get to the last one, since we are on the topic and this stuff matters to me, friendly reminder and PSA that your pet cat should not be an outdoor cat. For some reason, it still does not seem to be common knowledge that letting your house cat roam around outside freely and without supervision is actually super irresponsible pet ownership. They are extremely effective predators that you are introducing to an already strained food chain, and if that is not reason enough to not let the tiny apex predator out on its own for long stretches of time, any veterinarian or cat expert worth their salt will tell you how dangerous it is for your beloved kitty. You're exposing it to a whole host of injuries, abuse, stress, and infectious conditions, some of which could be zoonotic and affect you or other animals in your household. If you want your cat to experience the outdoors, there are tons of ways to do it without just opening the door and letting them wreak havoc on local wildlife, other pets, and themselves. Invest in catios, mesh playpens, walking harnesses, or specialized kitty backpacks. I beg of thee. Finally, moving on to the last ones now, we have Spritzy and Aromatisse. These are the designs I originally came up with, intending to tackle how I feel like neither of them look like perfume bottles, plague doctors, or flamingos, which just so happens to be all the things I saw people say they were supposed to look like, so that's a bummer. I also really did not like the use of color on OG Aromatisse, because I just think that the colors on Aromatisse are very busy, in a bad way. Common critiques for my redesigns, unfortunately, included Aromatisse having busy colors in a bad way. Most people pointed to the red, which, yes, it was definitely too much looking back. A lot of folks also pointed out that while my Aromatisse definitely fit better with the Plague Doctor theme, it got a little too close to Honchkrow. Again, I think some of y'all were making a really big deal considering that Game Freak is allowed to crank out a bunch of nearly identical creatures all the time, but I like Honchkrow and I don't want to steal his thunder over there. So these are the new concepts. As you can see, Spritzy is pretty much the same, but Aromatisse changed quite a bit. Firstly, I tried to really simplify the color placement on the main body for Aromatisse, both to better match Spritzy and to make everything less unnecessarily busy. Solid blocks of color are great when you are committing to using a lot of different colors. I don't know why I didn't do that the first time, but whatever. I also let myself adjust the red to make it a much more rosy color this time, which just made the whole thing look so much more cohesive. In order to meet the Plague Doctor prompt for them both, I just emphasized the original Plague Doctor face shape. It is shocking how that's really all it takes. I'm gonna be very opinionated for a second. The original Plague Doctor face thing for both these birds is just so bad. The face looks like it has an awkward droopy nose or a trunk to me, and not like a bird's beak, let alone a Plague Doctor mask. But also, if that's not what they're going for, I have no clue what they would be going for. So I just fully committed to the Plague Doctor shape. That way the hat wouldn't be necessary to meet the prompt, so we could differentiate ourselves from the other hat bird. Also, this time around, I leaned into a new suspected inspiration behind Aromatisse, that being can-can dancers. I had a few people suggest that was one of Aromatisse's inspirations based on how they interpreted the feathers as an elaborate headdress and a big poofy dress, and the fact that Kalos, Aromatisse's home region, is based on France. I don't think that that's what Aromatisse looks like at all, but yeah, it could be. So I took inspiration from pictures of can-can dancers who tend to have these really cool patterns on the underside of their big poofy skirts that you can see while they dance. And I interpret that into a sort of feather cape. I think that this honestly reads way more easily as can-can dancer than OG Aromatisse, if that's what it was supposed to be, as well as giving my design a really whimsical vibe that I think fits a fairy type mon way better than my first attempt at a redesign, even if maybe it gets a little further away from the whole perfume bottle silhouette thing they were going for. Then again, it's not like Aromatisse actually looks that much like a perfume bottle anyway, so I still think mine is better. We have at last arrived at the Fanart Feature. This is honestly always my favorite part of videos now, because it's really nice to get to take a moment to give back to y'all in a small way for your support. Also, it means I'm almost done recording and I get to go to bed soon. For today's Fanart Feature, I've got 3 lovely artists to give shoutouts to, with my dog who keeps grunting. First up, from Blue Sky, we've got a returning featured artist, which I don't necessarily want to set a precedent for, but Heptagon drew my beautiful baby Bean, and this is pretty much the first time I've gotten girl and ghost fan art, so this is a really big deal to me. The design here is technically not yet present in the comic, since it's a look she goes for later on in the series, but that doesn't matter because Heptagon's sick-ass style once again makes my characters look cool as hell, so thank you so much to Heptagon for this awesome art. Next up, we've got this lovely pair of illustrations that I legit did not know was a pair until I was writing the script. This art comes from My Obsessions here on YouTube, and it's of me, but in both my talk sprite mode and more slob kebab hard at work mode. I honestly really appreciate that you chose to draw the version of me with my hair up in the crappy bun. I know that it's literally like my profile picture, but still, I feel like I pretty much only draw myself like that in order to represent me when I'm tired or stressed, because that's how it typically happens in real life. So it's really cool and oddly validating to see it get fan art. Plus, your use of texture in both pieces, plus the really cool graffiti background, has just such a cool vibe. Thank you, My Obsessions, for this lovely art. Finally, we have this gorgeous piece from Jinx Joe on Instagram. You made me look so freaking cute. Your style is so clean, and the soft rendering around the eyes and nose just looks so nice. I also just really like how you did the shading on the hair. It's so shapy and good. It's such a random subtle detail, but I like the disconnected bit where you drew the sideburns. Like that's cool. I like it. I just like this art, okay? I don't know what to say. I just like it. It's pleasing to mine eyes. Thank you so much to Jinx Joe for sending this my way. Links for all 3 talented community members shall be in the description. Please check them out and give them some love. Our time together has at last reached its end, which means it's time to say thank you. Thank you to those that have watched this long, to those who suggested I do more of these Pokemon designs, to those who gave me really nice constructive feedback on my last video, and most especially, thank you to my channel members. Names of all my lovely team members are on screen now. While everyone that shows up helps support my really weird YouTube journey, these folks go above and beyond and have already been having fun joining forces to harass me on exclusive channel posts. What a bunch of silly goobers you are. I do genuinely appreciate you watching this long, though, and I am super excited to see what your feedback is. Again, while I feel like overall the designs and concepts for this one are way more polished across the board than was the case in the last video, there's definitely some stuff I could have missed, and if I ever do this again, it might be good to have more stuff to keep in mind. No matter what, I hope that even if you don't love everything I came up with, you still enjoyed hanging out and talking about Pokemon with me. I'd love it if you considered subscribing, if you haven't already. I make all kinds of videos about artsy stuff, and hopefully chances are high that there's more content out or on the way that will also be fun for you. Either way, I'm just about out of talk juice for the evening, so I'll let you go. Make sure you drink some water, give yourself a smile in the mirror, and most importantly, remember that you matter. Bye. Soon only I love you, 届けようきっと You love me 伝わるさ君に会うガラスの靴を探そうマジママジマ Save me マジマ